Before we kick off today, we've got a bit of news for you. Two Parkinson a Pod is powered by Parkinson's UK, the charity that's here to support every Parkinson's journey every step of the way. Wherever you're from, whatever you need, visit parkinsons.org.uk for more information.
Yeah, well, after 3 years of doing this podcast, we're pleased to say we're partnering with our friends at Parkinson's UK.
Yay!
Yay! We'll be collaborating with them on guests, topics and features for future episodes, and they're also going to help spread the word about Two Parkinson a Pod through their own channels. Now, there's a bit of cost associated with running this podcast. It's not huge in the scheme of things, but Dave and I have been covering these costs for the last 3 years. Well, now Parkinson's UK have kindly stepped in to take that on. What this means to you as the listener, firstly, it's still me and Dave. That's the most important thing. Yeah. We'll be doing our thing as usual, but we'll be doing more of it. More episodes, more topics, more guests, and more amazing people. Starting from this month, we'll be going from about one episode a month to one a fortnight. That's the aim anyway. For your listening pleasure or displeasure, I'm not sure which, you'll be hearing more from us. So hopefully that's a bit of good news.
But the bottom line is, it's business as usual. Two Parkinson a Pod is here to stay.
Now let's crack on with the show.
Konnichiwa, hola, ciao, bonjour, howdy, g'day, hello, and welcome to Two Parkinson a Pod, the podcast that's listened to in 121 countries around the world, made by people with Parkinson's for people with Parkinson's.
So I counted 4 of those in English. Good day, hello. That's not foreign languages.
It's not bad though, is it? Are you impressed or depressed by my linguistic skills?
Very good, very good. Was it neuroplasticity, isn't it, when you learn new languages?
Learning one word and it probably doesn't help much, but you know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. One word can go a long way, right?
Exactly. Perfect. How you doing anyway?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, I've just come back on after a prolonged off spell. I've had quite a few off spells this week, so they're a bit painful and a bit disruptive because I can't do much, but I'm feeling very productive this morning, so good time for having a podcast chat.
Perfect. I went to a concert last night, a really good concert, London Palladium, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Julia Fowler and Corinne Polwart, 3 great folk artists. It was a fantastic night. The harmonies were incredible, just gave you goosebumps. Amazing.
Oh, very nice, very nice. At the London Palladium?
London Palladium. Did you know Bruce Forsyth's ashes are under the stage at the London Palladium?
No.
Yeah, he's got his ashes under the stage because he used to do Sunday night at the London Palladium, and apparently his ashes are under there. So
I remember Jimmy Tarbuck days and people like that, Tommy Cooper and
all on stage. Sunday, it was Wednesday night at the London Palladium though for me. I had a bit of a nightmare there because my wife brought a glass of wine and a beer. She handed it to me. She went to the toilet and I was sort of stuck to my seat.
When you say stuck to your seat, do you mean you were like frozen or do you just mean rigid?
I couldn't stand up without using my arms. So my arms, my hands were full of beer and wine, and I started shaking on my right side, and the beer started splashing all over my trousers. Oh no, nightmare! So luckily there was a lady I recognised behind me whose kids went to the same school as mine. So I quickly handed her the beer, dropped it all over her skirt a bit, but it was all right. It was just a panic moment, you know. The more you think about it, the worse it gets, doesn't it? You start shaking, then the shake gets worse and worse and worse. It was all in my trousers. It was horrendous.
The lady behind you was she with you or just coincidentally?
No, coincidentally I knew her, yeah.
That's very weird.
really.
You have quite a few of these random stories.
Great escape, that was fantastic.
And so, important question for the Yorkshireman, how much beer did you actually spill?
I needed Arthur Ellis and his dipstick from, well, it's a knockout, to measure it, but quite a bit, probably a quarter of a pint. That was about 12 quid there.
Well, I was going to say, that's what's really annoying you, isn't it? It's a knockout. Isn't that the one the one the World's Strongest Man was in and Norris?
No, that's Superstars you're thinking of.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's a knockout. It used to be like obstacle courses and stuff around Europe.
Oh, yeah, right. This is just beyond my time, I think. You said London Palladium, and I queued you up with Jimmy Tarbuck, Tommy Cooper, and Bruce Forsyth, and you didn't come out with an impression of any of them. So come on, let's do it.
Bruce Forsyth. Go Nice to see you guys.
The funny thing about this is you sound like Bruce, but you got the face of Les Dawson. Yeah. Well, even I've got it. I'm like a brown Les Dawson.
But it was good, was it? It was
very good. Yeah.
It wasn't a comedy night, but it turned into a comedy night.
It was just a brilliant night all round. Fantastic night.
Yeah,
good for the soul. I've got a couple of tips. When I booked the tickets, I made sure I was on the end of the row. So my shaky side was towards my wife. So my wife sat next to me. So I didn't feel self-conscious. And also I could stretch my legs out when they're cramping up and stuff. Out to the side. Trip a few people walking down the aisle.
Yeah, very good. Aisle seat is the best way to go so you can escape. Also, you don't have that feeling of feeling trapped as well, right? It's even if you don't need to get up and go. It's sometimes if you're in the corner and you feel you're surrounded by people and
you feel like you're annoying people, don't you, getting up?
Yeah, it adds to the anxiety and the stress, and then symptoms get worse and it spirals from there. So
tactical peeing's quite good as well. Have a pee before the concert. Just have one before even if you don't need it, go to the loo before the concert.
Even if you don't need it, yeah. I've noticed, like now when I'm leaving somewhere and there's a toilet in sight, even if I don't feel the need to go, I'll just go because the urgency sometimes just comes on really quickly and better safe than sorry in other cases.
I'm actually seeing a urologist this afternoon.
Oh, I saw one recently as well.
What did he do? I'm not looking forward to it, really.
He stuck things up me.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Bladder and prostate probe. Probe was the word.
Oh, no.
Yes. Even the word probe just sounds a bit scary, doesn't it?
Doesn't sound too good, does it?
I'm just looking at the expression on your face when I
so
said
I look
probe.
forward to having a camera at my bum.
Does it help if I say probe over and over again?
Probe, no, doesn't help. I'm not looking forward to that.
I got sent a parcel from the NHS the other day, shortly after my 50th birthday. They proactively send you a prostate kit.
Yeah. You got to send a sample of your poo on a curly stick thing. Yeah. Not the most pleasant thing in the world.
You make it sound like a Mr. Whippy.
Well, if you're not careful, it looks like a Mr. Whippy. You only meant to send a little bit, not a whole tube.
Should I stick it on a cone and send it?
Imagine the look on the face.
I'm so laughing.
In the lab. Would you put a flake in that?
I'm laughing like a girl. I can hear myself. We're going to be talking about girls and women in a minute, but let's behave. Can I just say, on a semi-serious note, when we first started chatting, I felt really off. Actually, humour is a very effective technique, isn't it?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect.
It really does help with my off periods, which I've been struggling with. Every so often I'll stick on something funny on YouTube or just make a joke with Helen or chat to you, and it just kind of like lifts my mood and a good giggle. Often we're walking down the street and you'll tell a terrible joke, and it's so bad that you have to laugh out of pity more than anything else. What was the joke you told me recently?
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you do, but it's not broadcastable, is it?
No.
So, on a serious note, David, what are we talking about today?
It is serious. Call me David, yes. We're talking about gender differences in Parkinson's. We've got three great women on. Claire Bale, Associate Director of Research at Parkinson's UK, a third appearance on the pod. Dr. Claire Lehman, General Practitioner who was diagnosed with Parkinson's age 37. And Jo Tosh, mother of two, grandmother of one, retired nurse and principal lecturer. Jo's an advocate for Parkinson's and starred in a series about deep brain stimulation. DBS and Me, well worth watching that if you haven't seen it, but most people have seen it because it's been around the world, that one.
Yeah, let's hear from the three ladies now.
Ladies, welcome to Two Parkinson in a Pod.
Morning.
Hello, welcome. I think it's the first time we've had 5 in a pod, isn't it, Dave?
I think so, yeah. First time ever.
Quite a crowded virtual room, but you're all very welcome. So we did some quick introductions, and we'll make it little quirky introductions. Claire, Parkinson's Claire, if I can put it that way. No, sorry, the other Claire. This is going to get confusing because we've got two Claires. I'm going to call you Antarctic Claire, if that's okay. And you can tell us all about your Antarctic expedition, if you don't mind, by way of introduction.
No pressure. Thanks, Kuhan. Morning. So I'm Claire Lehman, also known as Antarctic Claire, because I worked as a doctor for the British Antarctic Survey on one of their stations called Rotherham from 2009 to 11. So I was there for 18 months. So I have run with penguins.
That's cool. That is really cool.
Very cool, yeah.
And person with Parkinson's, how many years has it been for you now, Claire?
So I was diagnosed in 2017 at the age of 37. So yes.
Wow, that's young. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Jo, your story, please.
Are you sitting comfortably? So thanks for inviting me on.
We are.
Yes, so it's 10 years this summer for me. I was 47 when I was diagnosed. It took a while for me to get my diagnosis, but my care was fantastic once I was in the system. But yes, so that's me really. No trips to the Antarctic for me. I have not run with penguins.
But you've recently become a grandma as well, is that right?
Oh my goodness, I have. When I drove home from my appointment 10 years ago when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and I was in tears and I was so distraught that I wouldn't get to meet my grandchildren, let alone be able to pick them up. I mean, at that point, my kids were not in a position. They were way before that they would be even thinking about that sort of thing. But I went straight to the loss of grandchildren. So the absolute privilege and joy it has been to get to meet and be able to hold on to this little baby has been incredible, really.
And a big motivating factor that to keep going, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It keeps me fit. I do my weights because he's a little chunky soul. He's the sort of baby that's got those legs that look like you could take a bite out of them.
Oh. And last but not least, Claire Bale. Do you want to... Hello.
Hello. Nice to be back. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Claire. I work for Parkinson's UK in the research team, and I think this is my third time on the pod, so I'm really privileged.
First time, I guess, I think has been on the show 3 times, so you're very welcome and welcome back. And it's Claire Bale, but it was almost Claire Beckham, wasn't it? If you don't mind, sharing this little story that you told me recently.
I don't mind. So I grew up in Cheshire, in the area where lots of footballers live. I still am a massive Manchester United fan, although times are hard at the moment. And when I was a teenager, still at school, I worked in the local fish and chip shop, and one of our customers was David Beckham. And the first time he came in, I was so excited and starstruck, I had to be told to leave, go in the back. In case I freaked him out. The second time, I managed to put some mushy peas in a pot for him. So that was progress.
Oh, well done. So it's no dating with Bex then?
No, he was already with Posh by that point. So I think that ship had sailed.
Oh dear. Right, let's start with diagnosis. I've been reading that it's often the case that it takes longer for women to get diagnosed. Commonly, misdiagnosis happens, and the whole D-Day experience, as I call it, for women as a result is a lot worse often than men. Can we just hear, Jo and Claire, your diagnosis story and whether you thought your gender played a role in any part of that diagnosis?
Potentially. So fatigue was one of my first and remains one of my main problems, and there was a conversation about whether or not it was menopause. There was no conversation at that point about whether or not it might be part of a wider Parkinson's sort of umbrella of symptoms. I used to work in cardiology. I used to be a nurse, and we used to find that women do tend to present a bit later. They just crack on a bit longer and quite often will underplay symptoms in some respects, historically, and not always. And I think I didn't make a huge fuss. I was able to manage. I was functioning. I was just on my knees, tired. It was only really when I started to get micrographia and a tremor as well in my left side that actually my GP perked up and thought, and then she referred me into my neurologist. And I was diagnosed on my first visit because I didn't realise at the time that Parkinson's was a clinical diagnosis. Also, I was by myself. I didn't take anybody with me because I thought, well, there's no point. This shows what I know as a nurse. There's no point in taking somebody with me because they'll have to send me for tests, and no one ever gets a diagnosis on their very first visit. Silly Jo. So I was by myself when I was told, and it took me about half an hour to actually leave the appointment because I couldn't stop crying. Oh dear. Fun times, but I wish that previous me had known what I know now, and my behaviour and my feelings would have been very different.
Claire, you're a GP. Did you sort of self-diagnose?
No. So as a very fit 37-year-old female GP working very busily, Parkinson's was absolutely nowhere near my radar of what was going on for me. And actually my diagnosis journey was quite unusual. I had literally no inkling, but one day I'd had a particularly stressful event, just noticed something weird moving on my hand, and I was like, what the hell's that? And I'm a bit of a paranoid android, a bit of a hypochondriac, and I also knew how long the waits were in neurology. So I was like, I actually went privately, and again, like Joe, went on my own because I was like, I know I'm a hypochondriac, there's nothing wrong with me. And as soon as the neurologist examined me, and they do this thing where they look for cogwheel rigidity. So before you get to kind of assessing for tremor and things like this, doctors have a kind of whole natural way of always examining everybody consistently in the same way. One of the first things they do is they test for this thing called cogwheel rigidity. So normally, if you for the non-Parkinson's people on listening, or for people who have got Parkinson's on their good side, they move their good hand. It will move quite smoothly. So if you try and move your sort of wrist in a sort of clockwise or anti-clockwise direction, it moves quite smoothly. If you move on your Parkinson side, it looks like a kind of like a cog is trying to turn.
Look at me and Dave.
Yeah, exactly. Here we are.
We definitely got it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Did you not know? So for me, as soon as he did that, I was like, are we allowed to swear?
Please.
Okay. I was like, oh shit. And I just burst into tears because in my mind, that finding is synonymous with Parkinson's. I had not been aware at all that I had any rigidity in my arms. And so I was just like, oh, I think I know where this is going. So, continued the rest of the examination and sort of did the finger tapping. And I was like, oh, that's also been affected. Also had not noticed that. Probably that might explain why playing Christmas carols at the Christmas concert in the hospital were a bit tricky last year. All these things then became apparent, but it was absolutely not on my radar. But yeah, so for me, it was a complete shock. And much like Joe, the tears just flowed.
Were you by yourself at that diagnosis as well?
Yeah. And I hadn't told anybody I was even going to a neurologist. So yeah. Yeah.
But can I just interject before we move on? I remember when I was diagnosed, I was given an absolute wad of information, mostly from Parkinson's UK, on the day of my diagnosis to go home and read. And in the information was Parkinson's and pregnancy. And I remember even at that point thinking, oh my God, if I think things are bad for me, some poor soul will be going home today having to know that their pregnancy is going to be taking place with Parkinson's. And just think, as I say, this is 10 years ago and I have a terrible memory, but I remember that really clearly as thinking, I was grateful on day one that was not what I was going to have to bear, that my kids, even though they were 18 and 13 at the time, they weren't requiring that kind of level of care. It must be devastating to be so young and have to deal with all of the psychological impact of it as well as the physical side of things.
Yeah, especially kids added into that equation. Although there are people with Parkinson's that go on to have kids. And by the same token, Dave and I know somebody that their symptoms presented when they went into labour. Their tremor and dystonia presented when they were having contractions, and that's how they got diagnosed. Quite remarkable. We touched, Claire Beckham, on some of the numbers there. It's about a 60-40 split, isn't it? Male, female, most research shows.
So we did some work on how many people with Parkinson's are living in the UK a few years ago. We're just refreshing that work now, so we should have updated numbers later this year. But in the previous work, it looked like there was about 60% of the people in the United Kingdom with Parkinson's are men, which I think common perception, I think people would think it would be more men than that. But actually, it's not that far off 50-50, really. There's a lot of women living with Parkinson's. And maybe that's an underestimate because women are maybe less likely to get diagnosed because of all the reasons we've talked about and the perception that it's a male-dominated condition.
I'm just going to read you some stats, if I may, about the impact of diagnosis. A poll of 2,000 people, and this is Parkinson's UK, found that 26% were told they had something else when they were first diagnosed. Half of this group were given treatment for a non-existing condition. 36% received medication and 6% underwent operations or procedures for this other condition. The poll also suggested that women were more likely to be misdiagnosed than men. In the same survey, I thought this was quite interesting. Did you feel you had to hide or lie about your Parkinson's symptoms? For men, it was 32%. For women, it was 43%. And did you feel ashamed about having Parkinson's? For men, it was 7%. For women, it was 29%. I don't know how much of this is a gender thing or an age thing, but there are various challenges, Claire Lehman, about telling people that you have Parkinson's. Did you find that in terms of telling your friends, family, colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. And I probably would say to anybody who's listening who's recently diagnosed, actually having braved to tell people, actually, I don't think I can ever recall having had a negative impact from having disclosed my diagnosis. So just to kind of reassure people, because actually when you said about that shame, that was quite kind of emotional for me, because I was like, gosh, so yeah, I remember that very vividly. Sorry. But yeah. Yeah, so I think, shame definitely does come into it. And I remember every time I said to someone, oh, sorry, I've got something to tell you, I'm sorry, I've got Parkinson's. I was like, why am I apologising? And sort of different spheres of where you might disclose your diagnosis. Obviously, you've got your kind of circles of proximity in terms of family, friends, colleagues. I'm naturally a very open and honest and transparent person with everybody, probably too much sometimes, people might say. And so, I was very open from the outset, sharing that diagnosis with people. But the difficult thing I had, so I was a GP partner down in Swanage, and, you normally want to kind of have a bit of a professional distance from your patients. But increasingly, I was finding with my tremor being so obvious and impactful in terms of how I'm doing my work, that I had to then acknowledge that, because sometimes people think you were just nervous or worse still having a shakes because you need to drink. So I then became a bit more confident at sharing that diagnosis. But it is tough, and different people have different levels of comfort they feel with sharing that personal information, because actually generally in life we don't go around sharing our diagnoses with other than our nearest and dearest, do we? Because we keep it close to ourselves.
No, I found the hardest thing was telling my mum about Parkinson's, because she'd already lived through it with my dad, so that was a really tough thing. So my brother did it in the end. I just chickened out of it, because I just couldn't tell my mum I got Parkinson's. Jo, was it difficult for you to come out about it?
It took me about 2 years before I properly could even say Parkinson's. I used to call it Mandy.
Mandy?
My children said I couldn't say that because it was a street name for a drug. So I was told off that I wasn't. That's not what I was supposed to call it.
Also, Barry Manilow's song.
No, I spoke to a lovely lady who lives in Brazil, and she called her Parkinson's James. Anyway, so yeah, it took me a while to wrap my head around it, and I had massive shame about it. It's probably the driving reason that I shared my story online the way that I did, because I felt so isolated at that point. I felt like I was the only woman in the whole of England I couldn't see anybody at that point who looked familiar, looked like I did. And things are improving in terms of support and visibility of women with Parkinson's, and particularly, you buy a car and then all of a sudden all you see is that car on the road. So I don't know whether or not it's because I'm looking out for it, but I do see lots and lots of amazing younger women sort of doing all kinds of incredible things and raising awareness and living their lives and being fantastic. Even though it was only 10 years ago, I didn't really see so much of that back then. But yes, the things are improving, I think, all the time. And I think in another 10 years, not only will women perhaps be more visible, but also there'll be a move towards increasing their visibility in things like research studies. I don't know whether or not you guys know that when Parkinson's medication or any kind of medication is tested, it's done on male rats or male mice in the labs. As women's hormones get complicated, even the drugs that we're on will respond differently. So Claire and I will absorb our levodopa meds in a different way to Kuhan and Dave because of the way our fat is deposited. I mean, it's just fascinating. There's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we're all getting the best out of our meds. And there's a woman called Robin Morgan, and she said, women are not just small men.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
So, Bale, that's changed, hasn't it, the male mice thing? If you apply for funding when you're just using one gender mice, you won't get it anymore.
Yeah, it is changing, but it's taken far too long, as Joe was saying. It's taken far too long for that to be something that funders, even funders like us, have really started to mandate. And there's been a fantastic project actually funded by the Wellcome Trust that has put together a new policy framework, which is going to be adopted by the National Institute of Health Research, the Medical Research Council, the MHRA, like all the big institutions in the UK are part of it. Lots of charities will be taking on board all the guidelines they've set out to make sure that sex and gender is properly looked at, accounted for, investigated in medical research, both in the lab and in the clinic when you're looking at clinical trials in people. So that's going to be, hopefully, a big revolution.
Good point. Also, the condition just presents differently based on your gender. I'll just read out some insights from research again. Women often report worsening of motor symptoms just prior to getting their menstrual period each month. PD symptoms have been reported to worsen during pregnancy and postpartum. Women often report premenopausal worsening of PD symptoms also due to a decrease in estrogen. Estrogen may be a neuroprotective, possibly accounting for later onset in women. Longer duration of HRT in women with natural menopause was associated with reduced risk of PD. Seems, Claire Bale, that estrogen plays quite a big role, right, in Parkinson's?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that researchers think could be why women are less likely to get Parkinson's. Our hormones might actually be protecting our brains in some way. But I think it's kind of amazing that more hasn't been done to study the reasons why there is such a discrepancy between women and men with Parkinson's. It goes the other way in other conditions, so women are more likely to get Alzheimer's, for example. But we just haven't really looked at what the biological basis for that is. And if we understood it, perhaps we could actually develop treatments that target some of those pathways that potentially could be protective for everybody. So I think that's one of the key things, is really understanding the biology and the differences between men and women could unlock answers that serve both communities.
One of my things I noticed with my Parkinson's was definitely a variation with my symptoms relating to my menstrual cycle, to the point that I would, and everybody's Parkinson's constantly changes, but I would be starting to get really upset thinking, oh gosh, it suddenly just got way worse. Is this my new normal? And actually I then started tracking my symptoms, and then I was monitoring my periods. And then I could see, actually, when I'm starting to get worse, it's just my period was due. For most women, it's the week before their period when things get worse. And for me, it was my tremor was more noticeable. I started to feel more stiff. My sleep would be worse. My bowel function would be different, so a bit more constipated. And actually also the week of my period, so basically that means half your time you're affected. And I know that there is research going on, so obviously Claire's really versed in that. And there's also some international collaborations going on that as well. So I think in April of this year, they're launching a gender equality approach for research in Parkinson's called GEMPD, which is a big international collaboration. But it really needs to happen, because actually there are potentially some things that could be done that would help ameliorate the symptoms for the people with Parkinson's. So, for example, if I'm doing extreme sport, lots of big cycling, I might up my doses of Cinemet to try and tide me through. Now, it's possible. And, I'm not advocating people play with their medicines without consulting with their medical team of support. But it's possible that actually if your symptoms are getting worse, that maybe you need a little bit more levodopa in the time coming up to your period. And maybe that's some of the research that might be hopefully about to be happening, because actually, particularly if you're diagnosed premenopause, you've got a long period. Also the impact about pregnancy. And I know there's a person in the Netherlands, Annelies, who's done lots of work on that. But also relating at the other end of the spectrum with perimenopause and menopause, there's a whole raft where women's health issues are much more differently affected than men would in that regard. So I'm really glad that Parkinson's UK are kind of pursuing that and supporting the research in that field, because it's definitely needed. So yeah, thank you for that.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, Claire, that research that was mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. So the GEMPD, gender equitable medicines in Parkinson's, is actually a big international effort. And one of the challenges is, one of the things that hasn't been happening is, women have been participating in clinical trials, maybe not as many as we have liked, but they have been there. But what hasn't been happening is we haven't been analysing the data separately. We haven't been going, okay, so is there something different going on in women compared to men in response to whatever drug they've been testing, or is there something different in terms of the progression? And all this data has been collected through many studies carried out by pharma companies, also academic studies that are funded by charities like us and Michael J. Fox and Cure Parkinson's. The data's there, so we can study it now. And this organisation called the Critical Path Institute have collected all that data together, and this programme now is going to start actually looking to see what have we missed. What have we missed about women and Parkinson's? What can the existing data tell us? So really mining all the research that's already been done to help try and find some of the answers that Claire's alluding to. So rather than starting loads of new studies, how can we make the most of what we already have? So it's really exciting, and we're really, looking forward to what it discovers.
Excellent. These sorts of things sound great. It does make you think, though, why hasn't it happened before, right? It's crazy. Can I just switch topics slightly and talk about DBS? Because I'm having my DBS in May now. I've just had confirmed. Joe, you've obviously been through that journey, and you've actually documented that journey as well. Do you want to just tell us about your DBS experience, Joe?
How long have you got, Kuhan? It was a very interesting process. It required a little bit of resilience because from a woman point of view, women are less likely to be referred for DBS in the first place.
Do we know why that is?
I don't know really. I had a lady surgeon, and my team from Boston Scientific who made the kit that sits in my chest were also women, and they very kindly didn't shave all my hair off. They just shaved 2 little spots where my little horseshoe scars went and where my device was put in. And that's surgeon preference. It's not about outcomes of infection. It probably sounds silly, but there was a lady who contacted me from the States not long after I'd had my operation, and she was devastated that she'd had to have all her hair shaved off. I think her grief at the loss of her hair was equitable to her joy of having her body back a little bit because of the DBS. I found when I was looking on the internet for information about DBS, I was curious about it, but I'm a lazy learner and I'm a very visual learner, so I wanted something to be presented to me that I could find easy and palatable, and couldn't really find anything. Certainly couldn't find any women going through DBS, and a lot of the information was a bit dated and a lot of it was based in the States. So I contacted Parkinson's UK, who I've been working with on another couple of projects, and said, look, I'm a retired nurse, so I'm not frightened of the NHS or being in hospitals, and I'm also a retired academic and teacher, so I'm not frightened of talking. I don't mind the fact that I look and sound a bit strange on camera. I'm used to that. Maybe I'm in a unique position to be able to document the journey, and that's what we did, a series of short films about the different elements of that journey, and it's been very well received.
It's had loads of views, hasn't it? Incredible. You're very brave doing that, because it's not easy to go on camera and talk about your story. You were so relaxed on camera as well. It was as if the cameras weren't there.
The film crew were completely brilliant, and they were as big a support to me as I could have hoped. A lot of the appointments took place during the pandemic, so I was by myself, and they took me for a number of my appointments. It was the camera crew who were my go-to gang, and still are actually.
Oh, that's nice. We'll leave a link to that DBS and Me series, which you can find on YouTube. It really is a good watch. What about you, Claire? You haven't had DBS and you've only recently started on medication, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yeah. I was a patient who was reluctant to take regular Sinemet because of the fear of dyskinesia, despite the fact knowing that actually if you delay your start of medicines, if you're going to develop dyskinesia, you'll still develop it at the time you're meant to anyway. So it's been a bit disappointing having started Sinemet, already starting to develop some dyskinesia. But actually recently I've been experiencing difficulty cycling because of my Parkinson's, which is horrible and really limiting as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that's a bit frustrating for me. So I'm definitely somebody who, at the moment, I feel I will have DBS when the time comes, but also mindful of the pros and cons, and it needs to be, the right decision for each individual at the time that they're having it. But for me, yeah, I definitely would be a keen advocate for having the DBS when the time comes.
Claire Bale, there have been some advances in DBS recently as well, haven't there?
Yes, there have. And I just wanted to pick up on what Claire was saying about dyskinesia, because I think The research shows that women are more likely to develop dyskinesia and have really challenging dyskinesia. And it's another area that, well, DBS can help with, but we need more research to understand that, and also how best to manage the medication so that we mitigate dyskinesia as much as we can. DBS, and I believe Kuhan's going to have one of the new kinds of DBS, adaptive deep brain stimulation. So this is where, instead of relying solely on the people of the team to program the DBS and go in and they can adjust the dose of stimulation that it's delivering to the brain, but that can only happen, every few months. The device itself can listen to what's going on in your brain and adjust the dose of stimulation itself. So if you need a bit more, it gives you a bit more. If you need a bit less, it gives you a bit less. And so it's much more responsive to your need. It's still very early days. I imagine you'll be one of the first group of patients having it. But so far, what we've heard is that it's been really positively received and seems to control symptoms and improve quality of life above and beyond regular DBS. So really hope it works.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Just to explain, it's not anything new by way of hardware. All the intelligence is software side. So it's not new electrodes or bigger batteries or anything like that. It's the same kit, but all the intelligence is having a software side. And it really is intelligent. Just from the way you're describing it there, it's real sci-fi stuff. And the fact that Parkinson's is a fluctuating condition in that respect from day to day and throughout the day, having something that reacts to that, reads that and reacts to that on paper at least, it sounds like a great step forward. Just switching topics now. Joe, you mentioned your partner, Andy, and Dave and I had the pleasure of meeting Andy recently. Andy, you've met after your Parkinson's diagnosis, right? Yes. Do you want to tell us just what it's like, sort of finding new love when you have this condition?
It's an unexpected, extraordinary joy. I was aware that it's possible to meet somebody, in theory. The idea that somebody would choose to be with me despite the fact that I'm poorly and knowing what the future might hold. I mean, none of us know what's going to be around the corner, do we? And I remain ever optimistic that just before I fall off my perch, there'll be a cure. But yeah, it's another way of having a great big dose of dopamine as well. I highly recommend being in love and having a grandchild.
Kuhan's a shining example of what dating can do with Parkinson's, because he met Helen, his partner, when he had Parkinson's. So
I did, yeah. I'm very fortunate. I met Helen halfway through my Parkinson's journey. And at that time, I've got to say, I was less progressed, obviously, far less symptomatic. And she didn't realise initially. And I was wondering, when should I tell her? Yeah, it was on our second date that I told her, and she reacted amazingly and has been my rock ever since. And I'm very grateful for that. So it does happen. I'm also conscious that there are 1 in 5 people with Parkinson's that are living alone. So, it is a challenge, and I've been there. It's not easy, especially when things progress in the way that it does with Parkinson's. But there is hope out there. And I agree with Joe, finding love is a wonderful source of dopamine stimulation in itself. So it's something that we should prescribe to everybody, whether you have Parkinson's or not.
Finish on a big love note, I think, there, Kuhan. Perfect.
Yes.
Can I finish on a big love note too?
Please do.
Because we're talking about women's health or women's experience of Parkinson's. And here you are as two definitely not female humans using your platform to raise awareness of something that is going to be of benefit to us. And I think that's going to be the way forward, is having amazing, supportive men around us, who are doing their best to help us out. So thank you both very, very much.
Well enough.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you each for sharing your story.
Thank you guys for inviting us. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
A fascinating chat, 3 amazing women doing amazing things in the community. And it just shows the differences between men and women with this thing, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It's a real eye-opener. I mean, obviously, we knew about this stuff, but hearing it firsthand about, menopause, premenopause, the monthly cycle, and how it affects medication, how it affects, Parkinson's full stop. Quite stark, the difference in And it's also quite stark how little research has gone into this area. A lot of Claire Bale's answers was, we don't know. It's not because she didn't know, it's because research hasn't happened in this area. It's only by these ladies standing up and talking about their experiences and us collectively standing up and talking about Parkinson's that things can change in research. We get more understanding and research into these aspects. Similarly, age, gender, ethnicity, these are all variables that I'm sure are playing a role in my type of Parkinson's. And I'd like to know more. I'd like to know some of these answers. We do have researchers listening to this. We do have scientists listening to this podcast. Hopefully this will spur them on to investigate a bit further.
We're all in this together, aren't we? All in this together.
We are.
Time for a bit of this.
People with Parkinson's do amazing things.
A passionate rave music fan with Parkinson's has teamed up with a composer to create a new piece of music and reckons the result made him feel whole. Mick Broad has taken part in research at Manchester's Royal Northern College of Music. Composer Emily Howard, who worked with Broad, said he'd emailed her about 200 rave songs from the 90s and 2000s and composed his piece.
Oh, I can picture that, actually. I can picture that.
People with Parkinson's do amazing things.
Hiya! 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 Hiya!
Hiya!
Do you know what that was the sound of? People in Wolverhampton who are living with Parkinson's have taken up a free course with the British Judo Association to help improve their movement and physical activity. Finding Your Feet with Parkinson's has been designed to use the power of the sport to help people remain active and reduce the fears of falling. The course collaboration between the University of Wolverhampton, British Judo Association and Parkinson's UK has been brilliantly received.
Well done. I used to do a bit of judo when I was a kid, actually.
Any good?
Just like the hiya sounds.
People with Parkinson's do amazing things.
We're excited to let you know Walk for Parkinson's 2025 is now up for sign-ups.
Oh, yes.
Join us between June and September with walks across the UK, strolling beautiful parks across sensational countryside, through historic towns and cities, including Belfast, Birmingham and Leeds. Let's hope we can make it a record-breaking year for fundraising. Details of where to join are in the show notes.
Yay, are we going to go to the Battersea Park one again, Dave?
I think we are, yeah.
Yeah, September. Come and join us if you're in the London area. We've been 2 years running now, so this will be third year. Come and say hello.
We'll see if we can win it this year.
I think just not getting lost would be a bonus, because last time we kind of got lost and cheated and finished before everybody else.
People with Parkinson's do amazing things.
Friend of the show, Andy Burton, has been busy writing more poetry. Andy published a book of Parky poetry last year and raised £2,300 for Parkinson's UK. He's planning to do volume 2 this year. Here's a little taster of one of his poems.
Here's a poem about Linford Christie, the legend, the sprinter. It's called Parky's Podium. A starting pistol at the B of the bank set Linford Christie on his way. He was the best, faster than all the rest. Sprinting legend, record breaker. I'm no fast mover, though I am a shaker. Hey Linford, there's one thing I can do. When I struggle with my balance, I can run backwards, faster than you. Then, bang, I crash and hit the floor. Sprinting never was my calling, but I'd win medals galore if the event was graceless falling.
People with Parkinson's do amazing things.
Finally, the wonderful Anne-Marie Booth has some great advice if you've been recently diagnosed. Her work entitled A Letter to My Newly Diagnosed Parkinson's Self was recently published on the Parkinson's UK website. It's very moving. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
You're going to enjoy this. See you next time.
Dear Annie, you received the shocking news today that you have Parkinson's. I know that you feel bewildered and frightened right now at the cruelty that lightning can strike twice in your family. You need to let this news settle so that you can begin to come to terms with and eventually live positively with this new version of you. Have faith and hope that this time will come, and I will be quietly proud of you for the resilient way that you have chosen to live the fullest of lives that you are capable of living. It won't be an easy ride. You will struggle at times, both physically and mentally. But as soon as you are honest with others and find the bravery within you to share and ask for help, the strength and love that you receive will give you the space from which you can move forward. When you're ready, seek out like-minded people with Parkinson's Put your fear aside and you will be humbled and inspired by their achievements, tenacity and sheer determination. You will meet David and Dave, who adore Bruce Springsteen just as much as you do. Zoe, who makes you laugh out loud. Johnny Boy and Joe, who know how to kick a ball beautifully. Claire and Julia, who teach you to be the boss of your medication and are very wise. Pay it back and use your voice to educate others. Do something every day with those you love to combat the apathy and anxiety that threatens to derail you on your worst of days when all you want to do is cry on the sofa. Forgive yourself for those days. They will happen, but they will pass. Say yes to everything that you like the sound of, and an even louder yes to the things that you think might scare you a little. Time is ticking. Educate yourself wisely about your newfound friend. It is a club that you don't want to be a part of, but you are, and you will need to arm yourself with the facts, the many research opportunities, and ways to stay active to give yourself a good shot at staying as well as you can. Ask many questions of your health team and then ask some more. Sometimes you will have to be determined and dogged to get the answers that you need. Not everything will fall into your shaky lap. If you can't ask those questions yourself because you're too tired, confused, or upset, find someone you trust to ask them for you. Along the way, you will learn many things, and not all of them will make you smile. Like whoever told you that some days you'll spend an embarrassing hour on the loo because you are painfully constipated. Nobody tells you that. Don't dwell on the past or what might have been. High heels are best avoided, and I promise you, you will learn to love flat shoes. Dr. Martens, of course. Finally, you will learn that a positive and pragmatic attitude can be a catalyst for something extraordinary. And one day, you might tell your grandchildren of the day that you were selected to be the first ever lioness and had the honour of playing for the England Parkinson's walking football team against all the odds. There is hope in the most surprising of places. With love from your new Annie.